This conference will now be recorded.
Oops, sorry. So Olitan, would you like to introduce yourself? Are you able to hear us?
Let me stop the recording.
This conference will now be recorded.
Yes. So hello, I'm Josephine Fanov. And I'm Anna Holm. And we'll be talking to you for about 30 minutes, and then we do an interactive part with some more informal discussion. So since this is being recorded, I hope we can wait with questions until the end. So we're from the SIENNA project. Sorry. And this is what we look like. So I'm the one on the left and Anna's the one on the right. We work for Uppsala University, but we're also in the SIENNA project, which is short for Stakeholder Informed Ethics for New Technologies with High Socioeconomic and Human Rights Impact. And we'll develop ethical protocols and codes for 3 separate technology areas: human genomics, human enhancement, AI and robotics, so artificial intelligence and robotics with human-machine interaction, basically. We have quite a large number of partners, both European and from the rest of the world. So we work with the University of Cape Town in South Africa, for example. And the aim of this project is to develop ethical frameworks and translate and adapt those frameworks into practical tools like guidelines for research ethics committees, codes for researchers, and proposals to enhance existing ethical and legal frameworks. And then at the end, we want to generalize those approaches so it fits for other new and emerging technologies. And we have 4 approaches. We start with a stakeholder-informed ethical analysis of emerging technologies, these 3 areas. Then there's a legal, regulatory, and human rights analysis, followed by public and stakeholder engagement. And then this is all being translated towards research ethics, professional ethical codes, and these improvement of frameworks. So the practical tools. And we have 7 deliverables for each technology area, so basically reports. We start with a state-of-the-art report that's actually available for download now. We've done legal analysis, surveyed recommendations and guidelines in 11 countries, ethical analysis, and then a telephone survey of 11,000 people in 11 countries, including South Africa, and panels and focus groups in 5 countries. And those are all completed and will be available soon. And then this is all going to be translated into an ethical framework. The project is structured like any other project with a support work package 7, which is where we are. There's also 1 work package on human genomics that you might be interested in. And that's led by Uppsala University as well. Heidi Howard is leading that, working with Emilia Niemiec, Santos Lokenberger, Solveig French-Schindro, and then a lot of people, including Gentina de Vries. So we're the communications team, and our role is to support impact through visual identity and channel strategy, communication guidelines, strategy and plan for social media and overall communications. And we also do a lot of monitoring and learning. And if you have a look at our publications part of our website, you can find both, of course, the state-of-the-art report for human genomics, which I assume some of you are interested in, but you can also have a look at how we work. So we have our communications-related deliverables available for download. So basically how we structure our website and our communication dissemination plan and report, so you know how we look and look at social media strategy and how we monitor and learn. And then we do things like this session. So we do social media training to explain why we might want publicity in the first place, and then try to emphasize that media is a number of different arenas with special rules. And you need to know why you engage with media before you actually go ahead and do it. We also want to tell you that you should come prepared, and then give you some tools to build a good story and how to prepare for an interview. And then Anna will tell you all about how to deal with the difficult questions. And then I think we also need to emphasize what to do in case of negative publicity. So this is where the actual training starts. So the rhetorical question. So okay, perfect. So when it comes to publicity, I think it's all about impact, really. You can have policy impact if you get your results to a wider audience, and it's good public relations for the European Commission in our case, and in your case for your funding organizations as well. But it's also for you an opportunity to spread your message, and it's quite a powerful one where you can position yourself as someone with expertise, either as an individual, as a project, or as a partner organization. It's also a way to become accessible and to give back to society, because in most cases taxpayers fund research. And we like to differentiate between communication and scientific dissemination and say that there are two different ways of communicating, really. In a scientific dissemination, when you write for a journal, for example, you would use academic language, you would report on your method, and you look at the very, very small differences sometimes. Focus perhaps on filling gaps in a field, you end with a conclusion, and you use a more rational kind of narrative, sometimes building on consensus as well. In a communication, it's the other way around. You want to use a plain language, you want to tell a story that goes from A to B, focus on the larger picture, focusing on context, starting with a conclusion, including emotion and portraying opposing views to make it interesting for whoever reads it. And as I said, media is a number of different arenas that have special rules. We think of it often as traditional media like radio, television, and print press, but we also have this more accessible new media where we include social media, but there's also a large number of online news providers and resources like podcasts, blogs, web pages, and wikis. And when you engage with media, we want to encourage you to think about why you're doing it, so you can choose an outlet that actually suits your needs. And when you work with media, you should never expect your level of detail, because if it's speech like radio, television, or in writing, it's not your text anymore. If you're a journalist, you won't risk boring your audience to make the researcher happy. So get to know your audience, or get to know the audience of the media you're using, and then adapt your message by thinking about why your research would be important to them. And then prepare. So if you're being interviewed, or if you're talking to a journalist to give a statement, you need to think about answers to the most likely questions and prepare 2 or 3 key messages that will get your point across. And try not to include all the details, but you should use your results as evidence to back your claims. And media will be interested, of course, in the hard evidence that you would normally publish, like facts and statistics, but also in the more soft kind of evidence, like personal stories and anecdotes, to make the story interesting and capturing for people. So then you might want to know why you should change your narrative from a scientific dissemination to a communication. And this is quite a controversial message for scientists sometimes, but people actually don't care about your methods. They care about how your findings will impact them. So if you want to prepare your message for the audience, just ask yourself, so what, until you reach a level of abstraction that suits the audience of the media that you've chosen. So if you're talking to a professional journal, you need to talk to professionals in that field. But if it's on a morning show, it would be the old people you meet at the grocery store, so completely different audience. And then there are different ways of getting media attention. Of course, you can get it for your conclusions, publicity for your results, like a press release for a publication. But you can also get media attention for your questions, like when you want to talk about why your research matters in a blog post, an editorial, or in a more expert kind of interview. And there are some reasons why you would want to do that, because you can actually put some questions on the agenda in the public discourse, and then eventually, hopefully, that will trickle down to the funding agencies. So it's actually important for your future research as well. So this is to show you a couple of different stories that the SIENNA project has put out using different kinds of media. So to the left, this is a blog post, which is another way of disseminating your work. But there's also this way of this kind of expert interview. If you look at the top right, you have our coordinator talking to Al Jazeera about what he thinks about Twitter banning political ads. You can watch the clip on that link. You can find it on our Twitter feed, actually. Or this more expert interview, the one at the bottom, it's in Spanish, but talking to people about more general, talking about the field as such. So if you want publicity for your results, you can ask your own communications team, or in the H3Africa project, or your university. They can help you assess news value to decide which route to take. So normally, if you want to do a press release for publication, you send it from the first author's university. You can also contact trusted journalists ahead of any publication and give them the scope of it. Or you can, if it's not news value enough to send a press release, you can still use your findings for a communication, writing an editorial text, for example, for a blog, or a news item on a website, and then you can use social media to get publicity for your publicity. So in SIENNA, we would tell everyone that they have to make sure that they inform us about their plans, and then when we write something, that they're there to review our content and liaise with us, and if needed, also the press officers at the university. And also, it's very important to always report back on publicity, especially if there's any negative attention, so that we can prepare, put measures in place to mitigate any communication risks. So if you want to write news, or if you want to talk to the media, you should remember that the first 25 to 30 words should summarize the whole story. And then you need to explain what's different or new about your findings and why they're important to the audience, because different audiences need different things. So if you think of constructing a text, if you build a scholarly journal article, you start with the introduction, you get into the details, and you end with a conclusion. But if you want to write news or an editorial or a blog post, you start with a conclusion, and then you explain and you use your results, your details to illustrate the point. So normally, if a researcher sends me a text, I would 90% of the time take the last paragraph, cut it out, and paste it as the first paragraph, and that changes the whole narrative. That's how we would like to build a story, because context is key. So you need to prime your audience to tell them why what you're doing is important, and then you frame the issue by providing context, and then explain what you've done to help them understand, and then you use your results to prove your points. And any news story would have 2 or 3 basic ideas. So never use more than 3 messages, because then it gets confusing, and then whatever message you have is lost. Prepare them and back them up with evidence. And as I said before, you can use both hard evidence, but you should also use soft evidence to make it interesting and read well. And those messages are the building blocks for news. So they're statements or arguments that are clear, concise and succinct, powerful, well-framed and conversational. And when we say conversational, we mean plain language. And then your story should tell us what's new and why it's relevant. And Anna and I will tell you how to put this all into practice and give you some real tools that you can actually use.
Yes, so when you're writing for print media, you need to figure out what your headline should look like. So when you're writing a headline, first of all, you need a few attempts to get it right. So write a bunch and then pick your favorite, but make sure that it's eye-catching, believable, easy to read, which again means in plain language, that it's brief and accurate, and that it's using an active voice. And of course, that it's appropriate for the target audience of the media that you're using. And then if someone wants to talk to you, you need to make sure that you research the journalist's previous work before you accept the interview, and find out if they have an angle that they're going with. And to make sure that you're not being used. Ask who else is featured in the article. Come prepared, have the press release in your head, and remember that there is no off the record. And then you prepare for the soundbite. Soundbite is jargon, and it means quote. Never use jargon or acronyms. It's always a bad idea. I say to people, never use TLAs, and they ask me, what's a TLA? Well, it's a 3-letter acronym, and worst case scenario, you use the 3-letter acronym, the journalist Googles it, and he picks the wrong one. He or she picks the wrong one, of course. And then you need to make sure that these key messages that you prepared with Josephine make good quotes, because if not, your piece will likely be scrapped. So help the journalist quote you by preparing clear, well-framed, and conversational key messages. So you arrive with your messages ready. You repeat your message again and again, and then you remember that it's a journalist's text. You don't have a right to see the full thing before it's published, but if there's time, you might ask to review your quotes, but you can't be sure that they will let you. And then whenever you're on camera, you want to make sure that you dress to impress, because even if it's for a print paper, they might want to take your picture. If it's for a radio show, you might also be on video online. And when you're on TV, you're on TV, so you'll always want to look your best. And then when there's a microphone, you need to make sure that you don't move around and that always assume that you're being recorded. Know that there's no off the record. Try to relax, stay confident, calm, conversational. Use plain language, again, it's very important, and dress appropriately. So don't wear noisy clothes or jewelry, because you need to make sure that the audio is good when they make the final cut, because otherwise, again, you will probably not be featured if the audio isn't there. And then when you're on camera, you continue to assume that you're being recorded. So make sure you don't do anything on camera that you wouldn't want to be recorded. But also don't pretend like it's not there. And then it's always something that might be controversial for some is that you need the makeup that they offer you, because the lights they use, especially in big studios, it will make you look,
very tired.
Very tired, yes. So even if you never wear makeup, otherwise accept it. It's a good idea. And then, of course, there's some more practical things, like don't wear pinstripe shirts, small patterns, or shiny clothes because they don't look good on camera. And then make sure to sit up straight and gesture normally. So then what if it's live? Well, then there's more pressure to come prepared, to speak slowly, to make sure you get your message across, and to keep your cool. So always be polite, never on the defense, and learn how to block and bridge, which I will tell you about now. So in an uncomfortable interview, you need to make sure that you object to bias and error, and don't let controversial or unjustified assumptions slide, and don't confirm anything damaging unless they have proof to show you. So sometimes they'll say they know things and then wait for you to give them the details, but unless they have something to show you, don't confirm anything that might be damaging. And avoid the blame game, of course, as well. Don't be drawn into criticism. And then over-answering can get you into trouble. So it's always best to know when to stop talking. And no comments is also a bad idea. There's a lot of don'ts, but saying no comments is basically an admission of guilt. So take your time and keep your cool, and just wait a few seconds before you give your answer, and then ask to review your quotes. But like I said, it's not a guarantee that they'll let you if they're short on time. So when there is a difficult question, how are you supposed to answer them? Well, the best way of doing this is to anticipate them and prepare answers ahead of time. And then you could get help from your press office or communications people in your project. And then you learn how to bridge to positive messages. But this is only if you don't want to or can't answer, because journalists and the audience aren't stupid. They know you're avoiding the question. So when you answer a hard question, you need to be clear, consistent, accurate, and honest. So a weak response would avoid the answer. So that would be something like, unfortunately, I can't discuss this. Do you have any other question? Whereas a strong response would acknowledge the issue and bridge to a positive message. So distracting, the journalist, and hopefully they'll take the bait. So you'd say something like, we know of this issue, yes, but right now it's not relevant as we're focusing on. So you try to draw them away from the difficult questions that you'd rather not answer. So this is called bridging, where you acknowledge the question and show that you understood it, build a bridge to a key message, and then control and contribute with something else that you distract them with. So this could sound something like, we know of the issue, we're looking into it, but I think the bigger issue is how these developments or our findings change the way we do something completely different. But this is difficult, but it's a good thing to look out for in interviews with politicians, because they know how to do this most of the time, at least, and it's always fun when they fail, but still. So these are some examples of what bridging could look like. So you could say something like, I'm not sure about that, what you're asking me right now, but what I do know is, and then you introduce something else to distract. We probably will send you the slides after this.
We can send this one anyway.
Yes, we can send this slide. So this did not sound scary. So of course you need more media coverage. You want more media coverage because it's good for all the reasons that Josephine told you about. One way of doing this is to get on Twitter and share your publications and contribute to discussions on there. Sort of like an online calling card where people can get your take on recent issues. And then you could write editorial text or opinions for blogs, journals, or news media. And you should stay available as well, because if reporters have your number and know that it's okay to call, they will, if you're the expert. And then, of course, there's new media that's easier to get access, or it's easier to reach specific audiences on there. So podcasts, blogs, and social media have a lower threshold. They have very often very specific audiences, so you could reach specific stakeholder groups. And it also builds your Altmetrics score when you're mentioned on different online media.
Facebook and Twitter.
On Facebook and Twitter, yeah, those are great for.
But they have to be open Facebook pages.
They have to be open Facebook pages. And then you might ask yourself why you should bother with Altmetrics. Well, because they exist, and it's a number next to your publications. That makes them a key performance indicator because they're measured. I mean, if there's a list of publications and then one has 597 that's your Altmetrics score, which is very, very high. And then one that we produced has 17. Then, I mean, that doesn't look good. I mean, 17 is good, we should say. But if that's next to something that says 2, then you know the 2 will look bad, even if it's not. So we have to take this into account, even if we don't necessarily believe in it. But you always would like a colorful circle. I think that's always nice. Yeah, it's something to take into account for using Twitter especially. So that's one reason why you could use it, but Twitter is also a good tool for becoming visible and accessible to journalists and colleagues. It's a place where you can listen in to stakeholder conversations, find news events and funding opportunities, identify collaborators, and potentially get feedback on research ideas and results.
So this is Josephine again saying that we need to talk about risk at the end of this. And I think one thing that's important to point out, we're from Sweden, so everything we write in emails, since we're a government authority, is in the public domain. And for us, journalists can request to see our email archive. And even if you delete something from your inbox, it can still be retrieved. And even though there are no legal grounds for this in your country, emails are very easy to forward, so you should be careful with who you CC, and if something is sensitive, it's always advisable to use phone calls and meetings to then critique, because if someone's in on the email thread, you might be vulnerable if it's something that you don't want to get out. So for you, I would say in case of negative publicity, you should inform the coordinators of H3Africa and your communications team, but also your head of department or the organization where you work, and inform your organization's press office and communications department, because if something happens, it can be things ranging from, I don't know, a controversial result, or accusations of scientific misconduct, or maybe a crime you commit, or I would say a crime that someone who's connected to your team commits, like traffic offences or whatever other kind of offences that might be embarrassing also for the employer. Because when those things happen, you should always appoint a spokesperson, and that person should be the only one who answers questions. And the responsibility of people in the team or in the project is to always defer questions to the spokesperson. And as I said in the previous slide, never send emails about these things. So if you take notes, you use the sort of pen and pencil and keep it on your desk, because once it's electronic, it's also very easy to forward. And that's not just for publicity in media. So if you're a whistleblower, you should also pick your channels. And think about communication risks in your everyday work life. So if you're angry about something that's happening at work or in a project, pick the place where you vent that and choose your words and audience. So if you're in a meeting, think about who else is there and who that person might be loyal to. And then when you vent sensitive things, think about where you do that. If you do it over lunch, there might be people overhearing it, and you never know who else is in the room where you're speaking. So think about who's listening when you're critical about work, about colleagues, about things that are going on anywhere where it could have repercussions for you in your own social media, but also at parties, because you never know who else is there, and also again, you never know who people are loyal to. So if we try and summarize what we hope that you've learned today, is to give them highlights when you're talking to media, either through journalists or yourself. It's only the highlights, and you need to tell them why it matters to them. And then you use your results to explain and prove your point. You refer to your results, never recite them. And then you need to also make sure that you manage communication risks. And if it goes wrong, if you've been misrepresented, you can ask for a correction, but as you probably know, the message is already out there. So talk to your press office, and they can help you mitigate communication risks by helping you spread your own message in channels that can reach the same audience. And if you want to do that, you can share your own key message in an editorial text or opinion in a journal or a blog, for example, depending on who you want to reach. You can give a new interview or statement to a trusted journalist, so someone else, if you don't trust the person who sent the wrong message in the first place. And join forces. You can issue statements as a collective, because there might be more than one person in your field who will sign off on the same message to correct a previous misunderstanding. And then you can use social media to spread that message. So for example, if you write an editorial in a journal, you can then do that together with a group of colleagues, and then the project or your organization can write a news piece about it for the web newsfeed, and then you use social media to spread that message. So you can build it in several layers. And this is when a channel like Twitter will be important, because it's a way of getting a link to the place where you shared your own message to a larger group of people. And if it sounds complicated, you shouldn't worry, because you have your own outreach and communications team working group that will be able to help you mitigate some of these risks and navigate some of these hurdles. So I think this is where we stop recording.